Hey friends, welcome back to my channel. This past Saturday, I had an entire day at home and I was determined to be as productive as possible. I started by going through our kitchen freezer to see exactly what I could use up. I've been trying really hard to make sure I'm using all the odds and ends that are in our freezer. For example, I only have about a cup of pecans left in this bag, so I'm going to chop them up and add them to some chicken salad that my kids can use for lunches this week. I'm also going to use our first bag of shredded zucchini to make a new zucchini bread recipe. I've been wanting to pressure can some ready-to-serve meals for a while and I just haven't done it. So I pulled this venison sausage out of the freezer along with some sliced bell peppers from last year's garden, and I'm going to pressure can red beans and rice. This big bag of frozen pineapple chunks has been in the freezer for a couple of months as well. I don't even remember what we used the rest of it for, but I'm going to put pineapple casserole on our menu for this week. We'll probably grill some chicken and have a side salad with it as well. But it is taking up valuable freezer space that I would love to free up. There are also 2 chicken carcasses from previous rotisserie chickens in here, and I'm going to can 14 quarts of chicken stock at some point next week. My mother-in-law brought home 8 pounds of leftover pulled pork from an event she attended Friday night. Being a full and busy Saturday, I decided to take advantage of that and make Parker House rolls so we could have pulled pork sandwiches for dinner, and the plan is to freeze whatever we don't eat. I will link the recipe for Parker House rolls in the description, but the main difference between these and my regular bread recipes is similar to the dough that I make for our cinnamon rolls, and you heat milk, butter, and sugar on the stove until it's just simmering, and then you let it return to room temperature before you add the yeast. I decided to totally wing the recipe for the red beans and rice that I was going to pressure can. Now, this can be a little risky. I highly suggest that you only follow pressure canning recipes from reliable sources like the Ball Canning Book. My favorite thing to do when making meals is to look up several recipes of the same meal and then pull my favorite aspects out of each one and kind of create my own. So for red beans and rice, which is a very simple meal, it usually starts with peppers and onions and garlic. So I sauteed these in the Instant Pot before adding the dried beans. Next, I sliced up my partially frozen venison sausage, about 2 pounds, and I put it into a really hot skillet, and I cooked them for a good while until they were browned on all sides and fully cooked, and then I just set it aside and covered it while the beans processed in the Instant Pot. Now it's time to add the eggs and salt to my milk, sugar, and yeast mixture before we add the flour. One thing I love so much about making dough of many different kinds is the more you do it, the more you're able to read it without needing a recipe and exact measurements. For just about every bread recipe, you simply add a little bit more flour at a time until all of the dough pulls away from the sides of the bowl. I then put it in the oven on the bread proofing setting for it to rise. While the dough was rising and I was waiting on the peppers and onions to finish, I decided to go ahead and get all these dishes washed up. There's nothing worse than a productive day in the kitchen that ends with an entire sink full of dirty dishes. Now, I didn't have enough red beans to simply make red beans and rice, so I decided to combine the red beans that I had along with some dried pinto beans. I gave the dry beans a couple of really good rinses before adding them to the peppers, onions, and garlic in the Instant Pot. I gave them a quick stir and then filled the pot with filtered water. I added salt, pepper, and Creole seasoning and then set the Instant Pot on the bean setting, which is 30 minutes at high pressure. By this time, my dough had doubled in size, so it's time to turn it out onto a floured or greased surface. I'm going to knead it for just a few seconds to get any air pockets out, and then I'm going to try my best to evenly divide it into 24 segments to make 24 rolls. Because this recipe is a bit more involved than my regular bread recipes, I don't make this very often, typically just around the holidays. However, days that you're going to be in the kitchen all day doing other things anyway are really the perfect time to make recipes like this. Now I'm going to stick these back in the oven to rise a second time before baking them. I'm going to write out this recipe in the description below. My neighbor gave me this recipe when she was swimming in zucchini over the summer and handed me an entire grocery bag full of big zucchini and squash. And she said it's the best zucchini bread recipe she's ever tried. And I will tell you, she was absolutely right. My kids found no trace of zucchini in the bread. It tastes wonderful. In fact, one of my kids said, "This is cake, Mom." I started by adding a little molasses to the sugar, applesauce, oil, 2 eggs, some vanilla, and then the shredded zucchini. Make sure your wet ingredients are mixed together really well before you add your dry ingredients. One thing I've been doing for years when I'm baking things such as muffins, cupcakes, cake, and sweetbreads is to run the mixer on high with the whisk for several minutes beyond when it's all well combined. This adds air to your batter and makes it light and fluffy and produces the most velvety soft baked goods. I poured the batter into a greased standard loaf pan and baked it uncovered at 350 degrees for about 45 minutes. Once it had cooled for 15 minutes or so, I sliced it up, added butter, called the kids down for a snack, and got rave reviews. On days like today, I am incredibly grateful for a double oven. By the time I stuck that zucchini bread in, my rolls were finished rising for the second time, and I preheated the oven to 350 for them to bake for 20 minutes. Time to check on our beans in the Instant Pot. I added the browned venison sausage that we'd made earlier and had allowed to cool covered on the stove. I gave it all a really good stir and then gathered my clean jars, lids, and funnel to get it ready to go in the pressure canner. I ended up with 7 quarts of red beans with peppers and onions and garlic and sausage that I can easily pour over rice any night of the week for a quick and easy dinner. Somehow I forgot to take a picture of my pan of rolls when they came out of the oven. This was all that was left. They were delicious, and we all agree I need to make this recipe more often. When I was finally finished in the kitchen and got everything cleaned up, I put some boots on and headed out to the garden. The weeds are knee-high, most everything is done, but I still have some pepper plants producing, and it was time to finally harvest my sweet potatoes. I had a huge variety of peppers this year. Unfortunately, I didn't grow any bell peppers. Last year I had a massive bumper crop, and we're still eating sliced peppers out of the freezer, but I definitely will be growing quite a bit next year. It's been fun trying these different peppers for fresh eating, as well as dehydrating the spicy ones for crushed pepper flakes for my husband. I planted a 30-foot row of sweet potatoes this year. I've never had an excellent harvest of sweet potatoes. They end up all curled around each other, not very big, and a pain to peel. I was completely shocked and excited to be pulling these big 6 and 7 inch sweet potatoes out of the ground. I ended up with 31 pounds of sweet potatoes, and I'm so excited to grow more next year. In our hot and humid climate, even indoors in the pantry, regular potatoes just don't store very long for me, but sweet potatoes will store for a minimum of 6 months. It's pretty amazing. However, I will probably end up dicing and pressure canning some of these. Thanks for watching.